Democrat Walter Mondale, who replaced the late Senator Paul Wellstone in the race. Minnesota Public Radio and KARE-TV hosted the event. It's just under 1 hour.
Welcome to a U.S. Senate debate presented by Minnesota Public Radio and KARE-TV. I'm Paul Majors, and we're broadcasting from the Fitzgerald Theater in downtown St. Paul, where the two leading candidates for the U.S. Senate, Republican Norm Coleman and Democrat Walter Mondale, have come together for their one and only debate prior to tomorrow's election. My co-host for today's debate is Minnesota Public Radio's Gary Eichten.
Thanks, Paul. The ground rules for the debate are pretty simple. During the first segment, Paul and I will take turns questioning the candidates. Later, we'll be taking questions from the audience here at the Fitz and via the internet. We'll direct the questions to each candidate in rotating order. The other candidate will then have a chance to respond, and then the candidates will have some chance for further discussion if they wish. Now, we're not keeping a stopwatch on the candidates, but we are encouraging them to keep their answers relatively brief, and each candidate will have 90 seconds at the end of the debate to make a closing statement. To give the candidates the most time possible to actually discuss the issues, we've asked the audience here at the Fitzgerald to hold their applause until the end of the debate.
By the way, we recognize that there are two other candidates on tomorrow's ballot, but given the tragic death of Paul Wellstone and the late entry into the race of his replacement, it's important for voters to have at least one chance to hear the two leading candidates directly debate the issues.
First question is for Mr. Coleman. What is this election actually about? Is it proper to characterize this as a contest of energy versus experience, past versus future, youth versus age?
Gary, this election is about Minnesota's future. It's not about Vice President Mondale's age. It's not about my age. It's about the age in which we live and how do we meet the challenges of it. There are some tough times in Minnesota. People are worried about jobs. They're worried about their economic future. Folks in rural Minnesota are worried about our kids being exported out of the state. People are worried right out of the cities, the small towns. People are worried about security. People worried about seniors. The Senate adjourned and seniors didn't get a prescription drug benefit in Medicare. So the question in this, I think, for this election as folks walk into the voting booth is who is best prepared with a vision for the future, with the energy and the vitality to move that vision forward, who can tirelessly build a brighter future for all of Minnesota.
Mr. Mondale?
It is a question about the future, but it is a basic question as well about which future. Will it be one where we're working for the people that you've just described, or will it be one where we're less committed to that? So one of the key questions in this fateful election, and by the way, I think this election is fateful, maybe the most in history, and Minnesotans have a real choice here. Who do you trust to stand up to these real issues? Who will make a difference on the first day they get to the Senate? Who will be there for the people of Minnesota? I have been there. I've served this state all my life, and I am ready to serve again if the public wants me.
Well, Mr. Mondale, go ahead.
I'm going to say, but if you, I think we agree about what the election's about. But if you look at the experience, I was mayor of the capital city for the last 8 years. We grew 18,000 jobs. We didn't raise taxes over 8 years. We improved the quality of education. We worked in a bipartisan way. I was a Republican mayor in a Democratic city, and we figured out a way to get together. We've got to change the tone in Washington. The Senate adjourned, and there's no prescription drug benefit bill. There's no energy bill. There's no budget. And so we can't go back to the kind of the partisan divides. I really believe if you look at the experience that I've had in the last 8 years, that is what I think all of Minnesota would want today. Figure out a way to get it together, bring people away, and do it as we did with jobs, as we did with education, as we did with keeping lid on taxes.
I don't think we do agree on the future. On the Social Security drug bill that you're talking about, You're supporting the drug industry's bill. I'm supporting the inclusion of pharmaceuticals under Medicare. That's what senior citizens want. You're supporting the president's tax cut bill that gives 40% of all the relief to the 1% richest in America. I would like to take that money and give it in the form of a payroll tax. Those are big differences. You have called for drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife. You have a campaign here that is a poster child for what is wrong in politics. You've taken not thousands, but millions of dollars from the special interests, from the Enrons, from the World.com. You have walked the line, and I can be independent. I owe no one. I can go to Washington. So it's not just about the future, it's where that future is going to go. I represent the people. I think your campaign has been entirely different.
I certainly need an opportunity to This may be the one question for an hour debate, by the way.
Gary and I may be superfluous here. You guys go ahead and ignore us.
First, when it comes to prescription drugs, what I support, Mr. Vice President, is getting it done. There are seniors today who are still sitting at their kitchen tables, and they got to make a choice between food and prescription drugs. The House passed a bill. There was a tripartisan bill there, and the fact is that the Senate didn't get it done. It may not be a perfect bill, but the reality is seniors want it now. The Senate adjourned, and seniors again are left with empty promises. That's the difference. The difference about standing there and advocating for all and seniors getting nothing, or seniors getting something. And so I'm always focused on getting it done. And Mr. Vice President, let me say very, very, very respectfully, when we talk about special interests and support from corporate America, that's been your world. That's the world in which you've lived. That's the world for the last 8 years, serving on boards of Cargill.
You've had a minute there, so let me just, Mr. Mondale, the first question to you. And it's something that, well, I'm going to lead you into that direction. And that is there a dichotomy between Paul Wellstone's values in life and your experiences over the last 20 years as a corporate attorney and a member of several corporate boards?
I think that Paul and I share so much together. The commitment for social justice, the ability to speak independently. And let me go back to this question. The problem with your drug bill, it's what the pharmaceutical companies want. You want to get it done. Senior citizens need it covered under Medicare so they can count on it. This is typical of the divisions that we have. And I know how to work with the Senate. When I was in the Senate, we accomplished a lot. I understand the need for bipartisanship, but your bill it lacks support in the Senate. 51 senators are for this superior bill, and it's a good example of what divides us. My bill is good for senior citizens. You said get it done. I don't think your bill should get done. I think we should do something that seniors can count on. Same thing about Social Security itself. You support these privatization, these separate accounts that puts Social Security money in the stock market. We all know what's happened to the stock market the last couple of years and the pension funds and so on. That idea is wrong. I disagree with it. So there are differences. They're fundamental between you and me about where we take this country.
I would respond to the question that Paul raised, and then I'll get back to responding to the Vice President. But the fact is, the Vice President has served on the board of Cargill, served on the board of Northwest Airlines, and served on the board of CNA Insurance Agency. It's not Paul Wellstone. There's certainly a very clear difference. It's just in terms of experience. So when the Vice President talks about special interests, I think it would be fair to say that in your experience over the last 8 years, that's been your universe. Yeah. That's been your universe. Let me, though, also respond. If I can finish on prescription drugs, I think it's important. It's not necessarily my bill. Colin Peterson, a Democrat, represents Southwest Minnesota. He supported that bill. Gil Gutnick supported that bill. Jim Ramstad supported that bill. And most important, certainly as the Vice President understands, to get it done, you need the House, ultimately you need the Senate, and then you need the President. And we could fight endlessly over partisan politics. We could fight endlessly over what we think is the perfect solution. But I think you got to move it forward. And I think if you ask seniors who are sitting out there and listening today, Would you rather have something today, something supported in a bipartisan way by like folks like Colin Peterson, something that the president would sign? Because if the president doesn't sign it, then we're stuck in gridlock. I really believe we got to change that tone in Washington, move away from these strict partisan divides, find a way to cross the aisle. That was my experience in St. Paul, and that's the experience that I'll bring to Washington.
Well, I'm not a lion tamer, but I'm going to hand it over to Gary.
Well, let's change gears just a tad here. Judicial nominations, and I believe the next question would go to Mr. Coleman here. Walter Mondale has said that he would absolutely not support any judicial candidate proposed by the president if that candidate opposed abortion rights. You've taken a different position. Why?
My position is different from the vice president's. My position is that we shouldn't have litmus tests on judicial appointments. My position is that this is another example of that kind of partisan divides that's hurting the country. I believe the president has 83 judicial nominees in the courts of appeal that have not been confirmed. If judges aren't out there, and I speak, by the way, as a former Solicitor General of the state of Minnesota, I understand that justice delayed is justice denied. Those appointments should be had, and it should be based on competency. There are ways to judge who's competent. I would apply the same standard in exercising my responsibilities in the United States Senate. I would apply the same standard to a nominee of a Democratic president as I would a Republican president. I think that's what you got to do. You rate folks, are they qualified? Are they prepared to interpret the Constitution as it is written? My only test, and it's not a litmus test, but the qualifier would be, I would not be supporting folks going there saying they are judicial activists and are going to do what they say regardless of the Constitution. But I think it's wrong to have litmus tests in these regards. I think that the president has that authority. If they're qualified, we confirm, and he should have the same standard for a Republican president as you should for a Democratic president.
Mr. Mondale?
Yes, this is another example of what divides us. I believe in choice. I think these issues should be decided by the women and the family. You do not. You're opposed to it. The Constitution is on my side. What's at stake here are two things. They have nominated judges who have had bad records on civil rights. I will oppose those nominees. They should not be on the bench. The Senate is an equal body and has the right to consult under the Constitution. On the question of choice, I believe this is so fundamental. It's in the Constitution that when we confirm judges, it should be on that basis. If you look at my time in the Senate, I voted to confirm most of the judges that were sent there by Republican presidents. But this administration has a right-wing bias that you support that sends up judges that shouldn't be on the bench. And incidentally, this Senate has confirmed more judges than your Republicans did under the previous Senate. What you're trying to do is slide around some very fundamental questions about the future of this country and its most sacred values of justice. I'm on the side of judges that can be fair, that can deal with justice in the real sense. You are taking a position that undermines it.
The difference here is that the vice president goes back and said the Republicans did this, and now we're Democrats and we're going to do this. And I keep saying, change the tone. Yeah. I'm not going to say because one side did it, now we should do it. It never stops. Yeah. That's not what you do. What you do is you bring a different. Let me finish.
What you're doing is sticking with the right wing and pretending to change the tone. It's not the fluff of what kind of words you say. And Norm, we know you. We've seen you. We've seen you shift around. We know about all this. And now you're in this location, and you have to take responsibilities for the position you're taking.
Again, this is the tone that you don't want to see in Washington. This is the tone that has resulted in where we're at today, where we don't have an energy bill, we don't even have a budget, we don't have a prescription drug bill, we don't have disaster assistance for Northwest Minnesota, because it's this tone, talking about the right. Vice President Mondale, the people of Minnesota do know me. The people of St. Paul know me. I governed St. Paul for 8 years. I was a Republican mayor in a Democratic city, and we worked together and we got things done. That's my record. We raised taxes in 8 years. We grew 18,000 jobs. We got the first AAA bond rate in the history of the city. We brought back the National Hockey League. We did things, and we got it done without the kind of tone that you're reflecting here. Let me just finish on the judicial appointments question, and I'll use Judge Pickering as an example. One of the president's nominees, who was supported by the Democratic Attorney General Moore of his state, who was supported by the Democratic elected officials of his state, who was supported by the local NAACP of the city in which he lived. But because of the same tone that the Vice President is expressing here and is defending here, and the characterizations of right and left, in the end you had a man supported by those who knew him, who were Democrats in a bipartisan way, supported by the Bar Association, and it didn't get through. And we've got to change that tone in Washington. It's not good for America, and it's certainly not good for Minnesota.
Mr. Mondale, I'll give you a minute to respond.
This is not.
Hold your applause. Just a reminder, the agreement is no applause till the end of the debate, please.
This is not about tone. I have always been for civil debate. In the Senate, I have always tried to reach across boundaries. This is about fundamental principles and not tone. The candidate you talk about had a very suspect record on civil rights. Why take a chance with somebody who would play games with something as fundamental as that? Several of these nominees have had bad records on choice. This is not a tone question. This goes to the fundamentals of American democracy. You talk about what you did as mayor. Employment went up. That's great. But employment went up in every city in the country because the economy was better than it's ever been before. You're troubled about the fact that I've served on corporate boards. That's really charming to hear a Republican worry about a Democrat who knows something about business. I think it's good that a senator goes down there and knows both the cause of social justice and how it works in the private community. You worry about my membership on Northwest Airlines Board. It's the largest employer in Minnesota. It has added jobs, including Duluth, including Chisholm, since I've been there. And that is true of the other corporations. I don't apologize for that, and I don't believe you're really worried about it. I think you're just trying to make an issue.
And Mr. Vice President, I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about it. But what the trouble is, on the one hand, and you should be proud of that. But you can't be talking about special interest. You can't be playing the class warfare card when you're there with United Healthcare, the largest HMO in the state. Great companies. You should applaud that, but please don't step back and start talking about special interests. Let me also raise the question about abortion. Even on that issue, Mr. Vice President, do you think there's common ground to be found? Do you think, for instance, most Minnesotans would believe that partial birth abortion is a wrong thing? And even if we have different issues, positions on that issue, we can find common ground. Don't you think that on the idea that parents should have a right to know in that situation? I have a 12-year-old girl. She got her ears pierced a couple of weeks ago, and then they called me. Don't you think even on that difficult issue that we should find common ground? I do.
But you're not finding common ground, Norm. You're standing with the right to life crowd, opposing judges who will find common ground. This is not a question about political compromise. This is a question about fundamental constitutional principle, and you're on the wrong side of that issue. So don't talk tone.
But are you willing to find common ground, Mr. Vice President, on the issue of partial birth abortion? Would you agree that that's something that we should prohibit?
I'm opposed to late-term abortions, but I also know that the Constitution says you must protect the life and the health of the mother.
And parental notification, do you believe parents should be involved in those decisions, Mr. Vice President?
Involved, but it's their choice, and it's not a legal question. You have been an arbitrary right-to-lifer. I am not, and that's one of the many issues that divide us.
Let me just finish on that issue, if I may, Mr. Vice President. And I would take exception, I'll use a kind word, to the description of an arbitrary. My wife and I have had 2 children who were born, first son and the last daughter. They died at very young ages. I have a deep and profound respect for the value of life. It's not arbitrary. But even on that issue, I think we can and should look to find common ground. But please don't describe it as arbitrary.
I say that I respect you I am sorry about the tragedy in your family. I know that life should be sacred, but where we don't agree is your idea that we should go in and prohibit through constitutional changes the freedom of choice that people have. That is wrong. I disagree with it.
Paul, you're up next.
Yeah, Gary and I would like to thank you guys for letting us eavesdrop up here.
Great conversation.
It is. I'm enjoying myself. I'm
Great
just missing the cup of coffee, actually. Mr. Coleman, we'll start with you. Just yesterday, the president was in town in St. Paul in the Xcel Energy Center, and he gave a number of reasons why he needs you in Washington. You've been described as being handpicked by the White House for this candidacy. As a senator, how would you be different than the president? And do you disagree with the president in any areas?
Oh, Gary, as a senator, I will represent Minnesota. As a mayor, I represented St. Paul. And what I looked at was the best interests of the people. I think I will start by saying I think it's a very good thing to have a relationship with the President of the United States. It's a farm bill that was just passed. Secretary of Agriculture is supposed to do a review in a year to talk about dairy policy. We've lost half the folks farming dairy in the last 10 years. We still have a god-awful federal pricing system that's killing Minnesota dairy producers. It'd be kind of nice for a senator from Minnesota to have a relationship with the President and the Secretary of Agriculture. The same is true in commerce, the same is true in labor, and a range of areas. On the other hand, in those areas where I disagree with the President, you got to be your own man. I do. I disagree with the President over trade with Cuba. I believe in trade. I think it's a good thing. The President has a perspective on that I simply disagree with, and I will tell the President, Mr. President, I think you're wrong. And I'll have that conversation with him. I disagree with the President over drilling for oil in Alaska, and that we have an opportunity now. Our oil fields are soy, biodiesel, or ethanol, and I've looked in the eyes of the farmers in southwest Minnesota. I've traveled the state over the last 2 years, visiting with, listening to those farmers, and they tell me, we don't have the 7 years it's going to take to get a drop of oil out of Anwar. We got to do it now. So a result of listening to those farmers, I'll tell the President, Mr. President, I think that's wrong. And so in the end, what's good for Minnesota will guide me, but I am not apologetic for having the opportunity to have a conversation with the President, to have the support of the President, and then be able to work with his administration to deliver for Minnesota. Last point, right. Some people say, but you're going to owe the President if you get there. I went on Tuesday, the President is going to owe me big time, okay? This is not an easy task. We walked through fire to get here. The Vice President understands that. He's been involved in this process. I get through this, the people of Minnesota put me in office, good Lord willing. I will go to the President and it will be clear. We have walked through fire, but I will deliver for the people who I represent, as I always have in my public career.
Mondale. I believe the issue is independence and all the great issues that affect our future. Support for education, making Social Security permanent, changing that dreadful tax cut that gave all the money to the wealthy. There's a whole range of issues where we disagree. And the question that Minnesotans have to ask is who really would go to Washington and be independent and fight for them? People know me, they know you. I've served this state all my life. They also know that I would go to Washington as an independent representative of our people. You have taken huge amounts of special interest money in this campaign, and every position you've taken on the central questions have lined up right with him. How can we, in the midst of a declining economy, where we've had example after example of corporate executives cheating and putting the money in their own pocket and setting aside pension funds and jobs, why don't we stand up there and insist that that enforcement board demand clear and solid rules that prevent this kind of thing? I'm for that. I insist on it, and I think we need policies that put people back to work. And these are real differences that bear on our future.
Certainly, as a former prosecutor, I understand what it is to prosecute bad guys, whether they're wearing suits and ties or whether they have vests over their heads. And I'll be very vigorous in that regard. But, Mrs. Vice President, let me ask you the question. In terms of being independent, what's good for Minnesota? We have a terrorism insurance bill that's being hung up in the United States Senate. As a result of that, the lack of terrorism insurance bill would mean that if we were to try to build the Mall of America today in Minnesota, or the XL Energy Center, Lawson Software, and the projects that I've been associated with, we probably couldn't get it done. The hard hats are sitting there, and they're not able to work because we cannot get this bill through. And the reason we can't get it through is because the trial lawyers want to insist on a punitive damage provision that would hold the owners of buildings potentially liable for punitive damages that are damaged as a result of terrorism. Will you stand against the trial lawyers and stand with the hard hats to support getting that terrorism insurance bill through?
I will work to resolve that issue. I will work to pass the Homeland Defense measure. I have worked in security and defense, international relations, and the rest all of my life. And the problem that I was talking about, which is this corporate greed that's really hurting this nation because people don't trust it. They don't know whether to believe what they're reading in these corporate statements. That bill passed because we had an independent Senate that shaped it. And that makes a big difference, but even there, your administration is lousing up the enforcement program and shaking confidence. You may have prosecuted a person or two. That has to be done. We've all done that. But this is a question of our future and whether the rules and the laws prohibit this kind of greed that has so assaulted the future of our country. And you know that I will be there. We do not know where you will be.
Will you challenge, I understand you, Mr. Vice President, you'll challenge the trial lawyers to get a terrorism insurance bill through?
I will do what I have to do to respond to the needs of America. There are times when we need good lawyers on the other side. I am not a plaintiff's lawyer, and I will work that out at the time.
The president recently...
Let's move on here, just for Mr. Mondale, and you alluded to this, Homeland Security, stalled in the Senate, concerns about collective bargaining. As a former vice president, how much power should the executive branch, how much flexibility should it have over federal employees?
The terrorists are a real threat. They're up and on their feet. We have to take this very seriously. We need a Homeland Security bill. It should have passed already. One of the things I can do, because I've been in the Senate, I know the Senate, I was the president of the Senate. When I go back, I will be, if the public wants me there, I will be in the leadership at the first moment and be able to work on it. That's one of the first things we must do. But the administration must bend too. What is wrong with allowing these employees to have civil service protection? I don't see any problem with that. And why shouldn't employees have some rights? In other words, this is not just saying yes to everything the president wants. This is working out compromises that make a difference for our future.
Mr. Vice President, the issue here is an issue that's been around for a long time. It's an authority that Jimmy Carter exercised many, many times. And the reality is what's before the Senate right now is a provision that is sponsored by the union bosses in Washington who don't want to give the president the same authority that the president had just when they developed that Transportation Security Agency, the same authority that the president has in every other agency of the federal government. Authority that Jimmy Carter had, authority that Ronald Reagan had, authority that Bill Clinton had, and that is in times of national, in concerns about national security, that the president has the ability to hire, to move people around, to do those things again in every other agency in government. So the question is, will you separate yourself from those folks who are looking at an interest that would take away the authority the president has in every other agency, when you and I both agree that terrorism is real, that security threats are real? And you know, I mean, one of the examples was in the customs area where the administration wanted the customs officials to wear a device that would be able to detect whether nuclear materials are being imported in, and the union wanted to subject that to collective bargaining. Don't you think under those circumstances that the administration can say, hey, we have a national security concern and we're simply going to do this? And the bill is being held up because folks do not want to give that authority to the president and perhaps one of the most important agencies of government, Homeland Security.
There is a bipartisan bill that would have passed, but the administration refused to go along with it because it extended civil service protection to the employees. Why can't they bend a little bit?
question.
No, I'm asking questions now. Why do you take this hard line that would undermine the protection that employees should have and need? Don't worry about me and terrorism. I am opposed to it, and I've helped fight it for years. What we need is balance here, and what we're spelling out here is our different view of the future.
Let me, if I may, just then ask one question. Would you agree that this president should have the same authority with Homeland Security that Jimmy Carter had with every agency of federal government? Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I also agree that there should be civil service protection, and I believe these employees should have rights. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Why are you opposing the compromise?
No, there isn't opposing a compromise. You have folks in your party, Mr. Vice President, who are saying that the president shouldn't have the same authority Jimmy Carter had. You have folks in your party saying the president shouldn't have the same authority that he would have in every other agency of government. We really should compromise, and I'll work on that.
There is a compromise bill that should pass that I'm for and you're against.
We want to get to some questions from the audience, but we haven't even talked about war and peace. And so I'm going to put this question to you folks, since Mr. Mondale, you said if you had been in the Senate, you would have voted against the resolution authorizing the use of military force against Iraq, and urged instead that the U.S. work with the UN. The U.S. is working with the UN. If the UN doesn't do anything, what should the U.S. do?
Of course, we have to reserve the right, if necessary, to go back and form an alliance, an allegiance with allies around the world to make certain that Saddam Hussein is constrained. That's not the problem right now. The problem was that at the start, all we heard about was regime change, about going it our way, and in fact, the Vice President of the United States gave a speech in which he said, don't worry about inspections, the UN won't do a good job, we don't have to go to the UN. And my opinion is, based on years of experience, that you must have a policy in which we work with the world. That's what this president's father did. That's what we need to do now. We need to insist on UN inspections. We need to get UN Security Council approval and demand that those weapons be eliminated. And we have to do what we haven't done a good job of doing, and that is reach out to the world and get our friends and our allies. It's in a situation today where people are getting elected by running against America. And these are friends, they're not enemies. We have to get a better tone to our approach. And I think within this administration, there are people that agree with me. I think Colin Powell agrees with me. But there's hawks around there that keep making these bellicose statements that I think undermines our credibility in the world.
Mr. Coleman?
Two observations. First, I'm pleased that the Vice President and I agree that we need to reserve the authority to do what needs to be done to protect America's security. And the issue really is then what's the best way to get that broad multilateral coalition? And the reality is that 77 senators, a broad bipartisan, both sides of the aisle said the way to do that is to come together as Americans to show our resolve and then put us in a position that we're in now, which is we have some strength in working with the UN, and the President is doing everything that the Vice President has talked about. And had we taken the other approach, we would be negotiating from weakness. The world community would say the U.S. can't come together, Congress can't come together. What incentive do you think there would be at that time for folks to work with us? None. Mr. Vice President, again, I would respectfully say negotiating from weakness in these issues is not the way to get it done. It was not the way to get it done in Ronald Reagan's time. It's not the way to get it done. And I would also say, and I think it's a little unfair, I do also know Colin Powell. And I have never heard Colin Powell say what you said, Mr. Vice President, ever. Ever. And he has.
Then you haven't been listening. He said several times exactly what I've said. Moreover, your Vice President gave a speech exactly contrary to your position, or what I thought I heard you say, in which he said the UN is useless. The inspection system is not worth it. We were telling the world we were going to go on our own. That is not strength, Norman. That's weakness. We're strong when we have the world with us. We're strong when we approach the world as partners. I've had some experience in diplomacy, and I can tell you, even America needs friends. And if we can get the Security Council behind us, we are stronger, not weaker. And when we present ourselves against this monster Saddam Hussein, we can squeeze him better. I'll give the administration credit for this. In North Korea, which is actually more dangerous than Iraq, because they may have nuclear weapons now, which Iraq does not have, the administration is doing what I'm talking about. They are negotiating. And Japan, South Korea, China, and Russia are all in there squeezing North Korea. That's not weakness, that's strength.
And Joe Biden, and Joe Lieberman, and Tom Daschle ultimately, and Dick Gephardt all disagreed with your assessment, Mr. Vice President, about how to deal with the UN. What the President has said very clearly is we will work with the UN. They have to show us that they're willing to uphold their resolutions, but we are doing it in a united way. 77 senators agreed, broad bipartisan way. That's the way to go. Not to be weak, not to step back and say, let Kofi Annan and the Security Council decide how to deal with Saddam Hussein.
An actual question from the audience, an anonymous question. Mr. Coleman, what can we do to try to keep our young people from leaving Minnesota's rural areas?
We got to make sure that there's a reason for them to get back. When I got elected mayor of St. Paul, kids were leaving St. Paul. We had lost our largest employer, West Publishing. There were bad economic times. Parents decide whether to stay in a community. One, whether there are jobs, economic opportunity. Two, whether there's good quality education. And three, whether it's safe. And those are issues, Paul, in which I have worked time and again. I have visited throughout rural Minnesota. I have talked to the neighbors. I've talked to the farmers. I've talked to the important people, the local elected officials, the Glenn Gus, the mayor of Laverne, who runs the grocery store in that town. What they need is jobs and economic development, economic opportunity. I understand how to do that. You do not do it by raising taxes. I have never met a small business person or a farmer in rural Minnesota say that you're going to grow my economy, grow the jobs by raising taxes. That has been the Vice President's approach in the past. I think you do it then by doing those things that promote economic growth and opportunity, those things that then promote quality education, and those things that promote public safety. In each of those areas, I have a record over the last 8 years of accomplishing things. We can do it in St. Paul. We can do it in the rest of Minnesota.
Mr. Mondale.
We need many things. We need good farm programs, and I've been a champion of that. We need disaster relief for western Minnesota, and it would be helpful if we could get some help out of the House on that. We need to really develop new business and growth in this state, and we need someone who's worked around the state and knows it. On the issue of taxes, once again, it's the difference between our vision. Who gets the tax relief? In your bill, most of it goes to the wealthy. That does not help business. In fact, since it was adopted, American economy has gone down. We've added 2 million unemployed in America, and Americans are concerned. We need to have a policy where this relief, we need tax cuts, but where this relief goes to middle and moderate income. That's not what you're for. In fact, am I not correct that you have proposed that we repeal the alternative minimum tax for corporations that would leave many corporations tax-free? And would you tell us about that?
Two observations. First, things have gone downhill in this economy before the president got elected. They really went downhill when Jim Jeffords switched parties. From that point on, and the result of that, Mr. Vice President, is that same disaster relief assistance that you're talking about didn't get through the United States Senate. We got it
twice
it has
the United States Senate.
It has not got through a final bill. The bill, the provision, Mr. Vice President, was contained in the Interior Appropriations Bill, and the Interior Appropriations Bill never got through. So they never got to conference committee, and in order to get it done, and I certainly don't want to lecture you on Senate rule, but Mr. Vice President, a little bit about the facts in this regard. It didn't get through the Senate Interior Appropriations Bill.
Let's not bog down on that.
Let me also, we have a fundamental difference on the issue of taxes.
Let me finish my point.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Vice President, I think I was...
Please, Norman, may I...
10 seconds, 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
10 seconds. Are you done?
You know something? I'll defer to the Vice President.
No, take your time. Take your time.
Just two observations. Fundamentally, you don't grow jobs, you don't grow the economy by raising taxes. The Vice President thought that in 1984. He was wrong. He proposes now again what he calls rolling back some of the tax cut that's raising taxes. 1.7 million Minnesota families receive rebates as a result of this tax bill, and that's a good thing for Minnesota.
Okay, and a quick comment.
Most of the tax relief goes to that 1% of the wealthiest in the bill that you want. If we'd given that tax relief instead to middle and moderate income Americans, most Minnesotans would have gotten real relief. You talk about my proposal for tax increase in '84. You know, right after the election, they raised taxes. I was the one who told the truth before the election. And I think that's one of the big things that Minnesotans have to look at. Who's got the courage to stand up and level with the people even when it's difficult? It wasn't an issue of tax increases. We had to do it. We had deficits of $300 billion. And we had to take care of it.
And Mr. Vice President, I didn't raise taxes for 8 years. It depends on your approach. If you believe that you start off with the willingness to raise taxes, there will be no end. We took a very different approach in St. Paul.
Talking about cutting taxes.
All right, let's move on here. Another question from the audience, and this goes to Mr. Mondale. You authored many of the welfare laws that were changed in 1996. Do you believe that those reforms are taking us in the right direction?
Those reforms, with economic growth and with efforts by state and local government to give help to these people that are transitioning from welfare to work, do make sense, and I support that. One of the problems right now is that the economy is slipping and there may not be jobs for these persons. And secondly, there's a lot of things that people at the margins need in terms of daycare, in terms of education, in terms of assistance, and together with economic growth that makes the difference. What I'm fearful of, and what I think is the case, that both of those things are missing now. The economy is slipping, and this administration shows no interest at all in stepping forward and trying to do something fundamental to help these people.
Coleman?
I am very pleased that the Vice President agrees that welfare reform has been a good thing. This is really an example where you need new ideas and new thinking. The Vice President was at the heart of developing a system that in the end was, I think, well-intentioned. We wanted to take care of the least amongst us, but the results were really very disastrous. We created generations of dependency. It was a well-intentioned idea. It was an old idea. It didn't work well. And we had to change it. We changed it in '96, and we then kind of lifted the importance of work. The best welfare program is a job, and the best housing program is a job, and we made those changes. And I agree that as we need to continue to push that forward. So we move from requiring able-bodied folks on welfare rather than working 30 hours a week. I think it's appropriate. I think it's the right thing to have them work 40 hours a week. As we do that, we make sure that there's a safety net. As we do that, we make sure that there's flexibility at the state level. And here's an area where I disagree with the President. In Minnesota, in fact, we have some greater flexibility. I would work very strongly to maintain that flexibility, even if it was opposed by the administration. But welfare was a good idea when the Vice President originally worked on it a long time ago. But it needs to change, and we've changed it in a very, very positive way. We should continue.
Mr. Coleman.
But certain things don't change, and that is, one thing is a concern for people that are vulnerable, that need help. And that's what needs to be continued. The welfare reform has gone through, but that continuing concern, the thing that Paul Wellstone did in his career so brilliantly, we can't have that voice missing. You know with me that we will hear about people and their real concerns, including the people who are not heard. Your idea shows how we differ. You want to add 10 more hours of work to people who are already nearing unemployment, who are having difficult to making that transition. I think it's going in the wrong direction.
I think the difference is we agree on the concern. I was the mayor of an urban center. It wasn't a rich suburban community. I live in a poor city. And I worked for the good of all those in that city. The difference, Mr. Vice President, is how you get there. Do you do it by trying to give work opportunity, or you do it by a system that provided for generations of dependence?
Next question from the audience. This is from Laura. Mr. Coleman, this goes to you. I'm a stay-at-home mother expecting my third child within weeks. I'm concerned about the level of taxation. Do you support the repeal of the marriage penalty tax?
The answer to that is no. And again, I presume this is one of those differences, just fundamental differences on our views on taxation. In St. Paul, we created more job opportunity because we kept lids on taxes. For single moms, they have an opportunity in this tax bill, by the way, which raised the level of support for kids, the per-child tax credit. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Taxes, when we raise taxes, we take away these dollars out of the pockets of parents and put them into government programs, we hurt both the individual, which is my first concern, and then we hurt the economy. When people spend money out of their pocket, they buy a good of service. The person producing that good of service has a job. I'd like that mom to have an opportunity to work. I'd also like to have an opportunity to take care of her kids. And I certainly would not support the repeal of that particular provision.
Well, the reality is that what you support is this tax cut that is all tilted to the wealthy. If we could swing that around and give tax relief to the average American worker, that would be real relief, real help. It would produce real jobs. And if we could build some trust in America, where we could again believe in corporate reports, where we could trust ourselves to invest in the market, or to, in other ways, get the private economy going, that's the way to help these people. But that's not what's happening now. And we need an independent voice in Washington, in the United States Senate, who knows what he's doing to make these points in a solid, courageous way.
I take, Mr. Vice President, you will not support rolling back the $1,000 per person child tax credit.
Oh, no. Maybe we should increase it.
Mr. Mondale, for you, this is from Peggy. As a businesswoman in southern Minnesota, I'm concerned about technology reaching our businesses and our homes. What is your vision for keeping all of Minnesota on the cutting edge of technology?
Growing economy, leadership that builds trust. I think right now there should be a reduction in the interest rates. I think that we need to support education that produces economic growth. This is maybe where we disagree. We made a promise that in addition to putting a burden on the schools with new testing, that we would provide economic assistance for these schools, elementary and secondary and high school, that would allow them to educate these kids for the future. That has not been done, nor have we brought new help to students. We need to do that. We have several wonderful educational institutions in our state university system and in the community college systems and in other systems that help train young people to get ready for this technology and get ready for the future. That's our future, and that's where I think our support must be.
Mr. Mondale, how do you get that technology out there?
It is.
Mr. Coleman, rather.
Technology is the great equalizer in rural Minnesota. It really is. You can live anywhere, live where you know where your family is, live where you love the quality of life, live where you feel safe and secure, and technology is the great equalizer. And what we have to do is we have to make a firm commitment to make sure that all of Minnesota is wired and going beyond wired now. Now we're talking about wireless. I had an opportunity to visit with the folks over at Minnesota Wireless in Mankato. Wonderful cutting-edge operation. Attended a conference on technology about 6 months ago in that same area. It is our future. We should be wiring the schools and let the businesses draw off of that so that they can afford to create the kind of public-private partnership that expands the use of technology. We should be looking at opportunities to expand wireless. I'm a former mayor. I understood about infrastructure One is part of infrastructure is roads and highways, it's locks and dams, but another part of infrastructure is the wireless infrastructure. It's linking all of Minnesota through technology. I will be a champion of 21st century thinking when it comes to making sure that all of Minnesota is wired.
Yes, yes, let me just, and it requires real resource support for our schools. That's where we're different. We promised that we would really help local schools, public schools, to get what they needed. That hasn't been done. I intend to do it. We should be helping our college students. In other words, if we want technology, if we want to be out ahead, we have to begin with making our schools work. We've heaped advice on our schools. We've got one idea or another about our schools. But what our schools need is help. We're laying off teachers, classroom size is growing, kids are being charged fees for playing basketball or in the band or something like that. Those schools need help. And if you're really interested in our future and building the potential in rural Minnesota and everywhere, we must increase support for those institutions. Not just advice, but support.
And can I just respond to that issue? You're absolutely right. We do. And I've done it, Mr. Vice President. I did it in St. Paul, we did it. And in St. Paul, we did it not by a partisan divide, not by one side fighting against the next. We joined together, myself, the superintendent, the business community. We passed an increase in the levy referendum. At the same time, we did it with getting guarantees of accountability, and that's what you need to do. Make sure that the resources are there, but at the same time, make sure that kids are learning. Make sure that moms and dads have a right to know whether their kids are learning. So I think we're there for the resources. What I would add is something you haven't talked about, and that's accountability so that moms and dads know that their kids are learning.
We only have about 4 minutes left before closing statement, so we have to move along here, and I wanted to get at least one internet question in, and this is from a fellow in North Branch who asks, the affordable housing crisis has been growing since the 1986 tax bill was passed, reducing investments in housing. What would you do to make housing affordable once again? Mr. Coleman?
Again, this is an area where my recent relevant experiences show that you can get some things done. I believe, according to the last census, state of St. Paul was one of the leaders in the nation in terms of the numbers and percentages of affordable housing. And we did it, by the way, by focusing not just on affordable housing, but on all housing. And this is an area where when the tide rose, all ships rose, including the area of affordable housing in St. Paul. We had a policy of any housing that we did, that the city did, 20% would be affordable, and massive increases in the number of affordable housing. One, the tax change in '86 was bad for investment, and you got to deal with that. One of the things that I did in St. Paul is I cut in half the cost that government imposed on building housing, so that would hopefully generate more investment. I think we need to do those things that generate investment. I think we need to do those things, by the way, that grow the economy. Don't raise taxes, encourage investment. When you grow the economy, as we did in St. Paul, you grow the opportunity for housing, as we did in St. Paul. You grow affordable housing, as we did in St. Paul, and I think you're moving in the right direction.
Mr. Mondale, affordable housing?
The biggest danger to housing is the possibility of rising deficits that drive up interest rates. A few years ago, we were estimating that the federal budget would be in surplus by $5 trillion over 10 years. Over the last 2 years, we've gone into deficit. We are now looking at huge, yawning deficits in the out years. We are using money that was raised for the Social Security recipients under the payroll tax, in effect, to finance this big tax cuts for the rich that Norm is all for. If we really want to create an environment where housing will be there for our people, where it will grow, we've got to have a national economic environment that permits it. Your tax cut that you're talking about, instead of giving it to the average American, undermines that long-term prospect.
You know, we have each governed. We've each dealt with these issues. I did it in St. Paul. We didn't raise taxes for 8 years. We grew 18,000 jobs. The Vice President governed during the period of time in which he governed as a result of the policies that he pursued. What we had 24% interest rate. We had double-digit inflation. We had folks waiting online to get gasoline. We have each had our chance to lay out, taking theory and making it reality. And the reality is
Yeah,
that when you keep lids on taxes for all, Mr. Vice President.
Because it's right here. It's right here. It's right
I'm
here.
talking about a tax cut, and you've heard me say that a couple of times. And I'd also like to say that this election is about the future. It's not about the collapse of the Shah in 1979, and it's not about Afghanistan in 1980. It's about Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's about the real world today. Let's talk about that.
Well, you know, we're just actually a few seconds away from closing statements, and you will each be given 90 seconds to make a closing statement. And once again, we want to remind the audience to please hold any and all applause until after we've concluded the event here. Mr. Coleman, we will begin with you.
Thank you, Paul and Gary. And it is, we're here under usual circumstances. We have suffered the loss of a United States Senator, and we are all saddened by that. And the reality is now that we have to go to the poll booths tomorrow, and this election is about the future. I ask the people of Minnesota to look at my record, look at the things I did as the mayor of your capital city, in which we didn't raise taxes in 8 years, in which we grew 18,000 jobs, in which we had $3.5 billion worth of investment, in which we had the first AAA bond rating in the history of the city, in which we brought back the National Hockey League. We got it done by working in a bipartisan way, by changing the tone in the way we operate in St. Paul. We need to do the same in Washington. This election is about the future. Who, in your judgment, has the ability to do those things, to grow jobs, to provide for quality education, to make sure that we live up to the obligation to our parents, make sure that we have quality health care, who will work tirelessly, who will change the tone in Washington, who will reach across the aisle in a bipartisan way, as I did in St. Paul, Republican mayor in a Democratic city. I am an optimist. We have a bright and prosperous future. The choice is very clear. The times of raising taxes and more government regulation and big government are over. There is a bright future ahead for all of Minnesota. And I will work as hard as I had over the last 2 years, as hard as I have over the last 8 years as mayor of St. Paul, as hard as I will over the next 24 hours. I'll work like that for you over the next 6 years. I ask for your vote.
Please, hold your applause, please.
Mr. Mondale, you have 90 seconds.
This may be the most fateful election in modern history. We're deciding real things here, and this election is as close as it can be. There are big differences between our two candidacies. And I think the first question, you've heard our views, the first question now that you must ask about both of us is, who do you trust? Who do you believe will go to Washington and be a truly independent voice for Minnesota? When you make that judgment, you know a lot about me. I grew up in Minnesota. I was educated here. I spent my career representing Minnesotans and our nation. Secondly, you have to ask, who is ready to be a truly independent representative of Minnesota? Who is free of entangling alliances and big money that allows them to represent? What do we need? That sort of person who can truly independently represent Minnesota, or something else? Finally, it's the question of who can get the job done. I know the Senate. I've served in the Senate. I was the president of the Senate. And under the rules, if you re-elect me, I go into the Senate leadership on the first day. I can make a difference from the beginning and put Minnesota at the front of the line.
All right. Well, that concludes our U.S. Senate debate between Democrat Walter Mondale, Republican Ron Coleman. Now you can fly. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today. This debate was presented by Minnesota Public Radio and KARE-11 TV. For KARE-11's Paul Majors, I'm Gary Eichten, Minnesota Public Radio. Good morning from the Fitzgerald Theater in downtown St. Paul.
Also today in Minnesota, Governor Jesse Ventura announced that Dean Barkley of the Independence Party will temporarily fill the U.S. Senate seat of the late Senator Paul Wellstone.